Welcome to the Recovery 2.0 Beyond Addiction Conference. I'm your host, Tommy Rosen, and today I'm so pleased to be speaking with Nick Ortner. Nick is the CEO of The Tapping Solution and the creative and executive producer of the breakthrough documentary by the same name, which explores EFT, the Emotional Freedom Technique, also known as tapping. Nick also produces the Tapping World Summit, a free worldwide online event currently heading into its 5th year, which has been attended by over 500,000 people. Nick teaches a very popular 7-week EFT course and presents live tapping sessions throughout the world. Nick, thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your wisdom and experience with the Recovery 2.0 community. Welcome.
Thanks, Tommy, for having me on.
Yeah, so Nick, for people who are, I know there's still a few people in the world who are not familiar with with EFT and tapping. Could we start at the beginning and have you talk about some of the basics of EFT?
Yeah, absolutely. So EFT, otherwise known as tapping, EFT stands for Emotional Freedom Techniques. And we call it tapping as a general term because we are, in fact, doing this tapping process. We are tapping on meridian endpoints of the body. I like to explain it as a combination of ancient Chinese acupressure, that's the physical tapping component, acupressure or acupuncture, and modern psychology, that's the verbal discussion of what's going on. And it's a funny looking process that until you get some context with it, you ask yourself, why on earth are we tapping on all these meridian points in our body and what is it doing and why we look like monkeys? But the reality is, as you know, and literally millions of people around the world have found out, this is a process that does incredible things to the mind, to the body, and really the way it's working at its deepest levels is that when we're doing the tapping process, when we're focusing on an issue that's bothering us, something that's going on in our life, something that happened in the past, we at some level activate this fight or flight response within us, right? So when something stresses you out, you feel stressed out, tensed, and you have this response, and that is that low-grade fight or flight response that we know from the tiger who chased us in the bushes 1,000 years ago, right? The challenge that we face on a daily basis is that we are unfortunately activating that response all too often. And the latest science and research has found that by tapping on these meridian endpoints while focusing on the issue, we're actually sending a calming signal to the amygdala in the brain, that fight or flight center, and telling it that it's safe, that it's okay. So that's the basics of it, and the process, as you know, and we'll get into this conversation, goes into a lot deeper levels.
Well, thank you. And so I'm thinking back to my own experience, particularly with stress, that fight or flight response as you referenced. For me, I feel like I might have actually lived under the weight of fight or flight maybe for years on end in my life.
Yeah.
Is that possible?
Oh, it's absolutely possible. And I think a lot of people listening are probably living under that weight right now. And one of the ways that you can tell that you get an inkling of it is if you just stop for a second. Those times when you find yourself, whether it be at the end of a long day or you're out in nature or something happens and you stop and you take a deep breath and then you notice the difference in how you feel from 1 minute to the next, right? And the difference goes, boy, was I stressed before, right? Boy, did I just run on overdrive day after day, and I didn't realize until I stopped. Some people feel it when they go on vacation. They go on vacation, they're on the beach, and all of a sudden, the tension that has been built up starts to wash away. The hope here is that it's not that 1 or 2 weeks vacation that you manage to sneak in every year. Some people don't even manage to sneak that in, or they go on vacation. It's even more stressful because of what happens there. But that it's something that we can bring into our daily lives and to have a resource, a tool to effectively manage the stress. Everybody wants to be less stressed, but nobody knows how. Right?
Thank you. And so just to nail this for the viewers who might be watching us today, the fight or flight response, which used to be a response which got triggered by sincere danger, like you're being chased by the tiger, as you put it, or some other major thing is happening. Now that can be triggered just through emotional stress.
Just through emotional stress, absolutely. I mean, unfortunately, our body has not caught up with the evolution of our body is not caught up with the evolution of our world. It's a very different world we live in. Certainly in caveman days or even a couple hundred years ago, there were stresses, and we had different kind of stresses about feeding ourselves and finding shelter and that kind of thing. And our body was conditioned to do that. For most of us, not for the whole world, obviously, but most of us, if you're watching this interview, you've got a computer, you've got, you're likely not worried about what you're going to eat in the next couple of hours, and you're likely not worried about shelter. What you are worried about is the stress at work and the emotional issues that happen and all these things that our body just isn't capable of processing in the way that it processes the other stuff. So good news is that, maybe the tapping is an evolution of our body, that it gives us a way out, an opportunity to rewire the brain. Because it does, in fact, when we do the tapping on a, for example, a stressful issue from the past, we do, in fact, rewire the brain to act and react differently. And it's a strange thing until it happens. All of a sudden you go, I was really angry a minute ago, and I just couldn't let it go, and I was holding on to it, and I knew I deserved to be angry, and I needed to be angry to stay safe. And now I did this weird tapping thing, and I've let it go.
I love it. I heard this really amazing statistic that our brains, our minds now, or the amount of information that we're taking in on a daily basis, every day, is the same amount, something close to the same amount as our ancestors 100 years ago took in like 50 years.
Yeah, in a lifetime. Yeah.
So the stress that has to be putting an incredible amount of stress on our brains, which haven't maybe yet evolved to deal with this much information coming in.
Oh, I mean, it has to be the case. We think 100 years ago, most of us would have been out in the fields, and it would have taken more of a toll on our physical bodies, but our brain was taxed with very few decisions, right? It was like, okay, we're going to plow for the next hour. I mean, that was about it. Today, within the scope of an hour, I mean, if I think when I do emails for an hour, the amount of different things that have to happen in that hour of doing emails, and the amount of potential for stress and triggers if I allow myself to be stressed out and triggered, if I attach a particular emotion to something not going perfectly or something else that needs to be done. And that's what we're working on here, is the reaction of the mind and body. The emails are likely to stay the same. I'm going to have challenges and problems come up. I'm going to have issues that come up. But it's how I react that makes all the difference, whether they get solved quickly, whether I find the right solution for it. And that's a big component of it too. On top of the stress of the information, now when we're stressed, the blood flows away from the forebrain, right? And it goes into the limbs. Why? Because the body goes fight or flight. This is dangerous. Something's going wrong. So you can mobilize, you can go for a sprint then, you can do all these things, but you can't think. So you're faced with these challenges and you go, I can't figure out the answer to this thing. The joke is obviously, when do we come up with our best ideas, our best brainstorms? In the shower, in the tub, in a walk in nature. That's when all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, I have all this creative energy that's flowing, and this was an issue, but now I can handle it. And that's because we have lowered the stress response, and we actually have the physical capabilities to make these decisions. When we're stressed out, we don't have the capabilities. We can't do it no matter how hard we try. And the harder we try, the more stress we get and the worse it gets.
Well, let's take a look at the modality of EFT seen as a treatment for or something that can help with the path of recovery from addiction.
Yeah.
So I like to say that addiction is, at its core, there's a sense of lack. The person sort of feels like something's missing, even if they can't put their finger on it. It may not even be conscious, but somewhere in their being, there feels like my needs are not going to be met, and I have to go out into the world, therefore, and get my needs met however I can do it.
Yeah.
There's also a sense of disconnection from body, from the earth. How can the process of EFT help to begin to bring a person back into connection and bring them into a sense of wholeness that, everything is actually okay, the needs are actually going to be met, it's okay, and maybe even create a little time before thought and action? Yeah,
that's a great question. I really see EFT serving in this particular arena in two ways. And it's really the case with these two steps apply to just about anything you're doing with EFT. And one is using it to address what I'm going to call superficial noise, right? So what does that mean? That's the physical addictions and cravings that obviously at one point become a really big component to it. So whether it be a cigarette addiction, there's that physical craving. And we know there's an emotional need often behind that, and we'll explore that in a second. But sometimes the tapping can just help balance the system enough that people can get that pause, that second of saying, I'm in control. One of the hardest things for addicts is the lack of control. When it gets to the stage where it's just like, this is no longer in my control. Like, I need this cigarette. My body needs this drink. My body needs this drug. Certainly, I wouldn't say that the tapping is a replacement for whatever other detox therapies are used, but it can be an adjunct. It can go along with and saying, when I need this thing, I can do some tapping and just calm that mental noise and that physical craving. And then there's the mental noise of life itself, what's going on right now, what's present right now, which is, I'm angry at this person, I'm stressed out about work, I'm this, I'm that, I'm the other. That I think a big reason why people are addicted to certain substances is because they actually do the job, right? They work with the intended need. We know it's not a long-term solution, that's why we're talking here, but that drink relieves the stress at some level. That drug relieves that feeling of anxiety and fear and whatever's going on. So they're working. The cigarette calms somebody down. The cigarette helps someone take a deep breath and be it by themselves and connect with themselves. The question is, what can we do that works, that doesn't have the obvious consequences that these substances have?
Yeah, I call that we're looking. So that's short-term gain, long-term loss.
Hey, there you go.
We're
exactly.
looking for short-term gain, long-term gain, if possible.
Yeah, but they work as short-term gain. I mean, that's why people continue to use them, because they're serving a purpose. So the question becomes, what else can we do to serve that purpose? So looking at the physical craving of the body, looking at the mental noise, the stuff which is just stressing you out, and then once that step is taken, that's when the real work happens. And the real work is about childhood trauma. It's about things that happened in the past that you haven't let go of. More often than not, that sense of loss, that sense of not fitting in the world, that sense of feeling disconnected started at a very young age. I don't need to tell you that abusive parents often lead to abusive kids, alcoholic parents, beyond whatever genetic tendencies might be in place. And I'm not informed enough to make decisions about that. Certainly the behavioral tendencies and the learned behavior of kids that say, when life is stressful, Dad takes a drink. When life is stressful, I take a drink. This is how I respond to it. I didn't learn any other coping behaviors for life.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, I can. Go ahead, please.
No, go ahead. Keep going.
I remember, from my own childhood, I think that, the first time I ever actually smoked marijuana and actually felt the feeling of getting high, it not only did it work, but I felt like I had been built for it, or it had been built for me. That it was the first time I felt like I'd taken a deep breath in my entire life, literally. 13 years old. And like you said, it worked. I call it, at that time, I'd say it was very functional medicine for me. And I loved it. And so the question, as I went through sort of my period of drug abuse and ultimately addiction, what was happening for me was the medicine sort of stopped working along the way. I needed other medicines, but the core condition of sort of the core condition of disconnection wasn't being addressed. It was never being addressed through these medicines. So I think to some extent, tapping is so critical because it can stop a pattern. Yeah. It can break a pattern and get you back onto a path of, like sometimes if you really injure your body, you have to take a narcotic or something to break the pain cycle, or even if it's just Advil.
Sure.
You break the pain cycle and then the body can begin to heal. Yeah. Is it a little bit this way with tapping?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think it can open a lot of doors for other healing to take place. When there's that one thing that's blocking it, where, again, whether it just be, if we don't address some of the physical cravings and some of the mental noise and the stress of life that's active right now, we're never going to get to the deeper stuff. We're never going to find that sense of connection. And I think a lot of people, I feel that a lot of people have been on the path of recovery and have recovered or been off, drugs and alcohol for a long time, yet they still haven't established that sense of connection. So it's that constant fight, that constant needing the willpower to stay away from those substances. And certainly that's better than the alternative. And I highly commend people who have had that strength to do that. It's admirable. what I would hope for people is that they reach out for something deeper, reach out for that true sense of peace, that true sense of self-worth. And really what I've seen time again, and it doesn't cease to amaze me and kind of makes me laugh every time, that no matter what people come to me about, whether it be they have financial challenges and limiting beliefs and they want to improve that, or they want to lose weight, or they have this addiction or this fear or phobia, whatever it is, 95% of the time it goes back to a childhood event, to something that happened growing up, something that made an impression on the mind, the body, the soul, the spirit that has lasted a long time.